Hi there, Randy Green here, and welcome to the monthly open podcast that is out there, because most of my podcasts, as you know, are part of the membership. And I am aware that it's not everywhere in the world where you can get into YouTube for whatever odd reason. There are issues for some around the world due to local policies and the different ways that countries run their connectivity to the rest of the world. Let's just put it in that very politically correct way. And there's nothing I can do about that. That's just how the game is in the world. And things are most likely going to get even more limited as we are moving further into the future, where our sun is going to, as it already is, but we have barely begun the effects of the new upcoming solar cycle 26. We're still in solar cycle 25, and science is still within, okay, these are most likely the heat and the hot sun, and this is the El Nino, and this is something within the framework that science is aware of. But of course, they are already paying attention to the anomalies and are right now, it's because of the El Nino. And other groups are saying, no, it is because we have now reached a threshold where the weather patterns are changing. And I'm, of course, the last group part of that's saying, yes, the world is changing, because I know it's changing. And everybody who has eyes and ears to hear with and see with, eyes to see with, they will agree, yes, the world is changing. And as this becomes more common, these stronger issues within, and I know many of you say, well, the Southern Hemisphere goes from we could be kind of say from the equatorial line and down. But the Southern Hemisphere is actually higher. It goes all the way up in terms of energy, in terms of grids, in terms of original reality field configuration, go up to almost where the low point of Britain. It goes so far up. So the Southern Hemisphere is in the factional energetic category, understood as where the grids of earlier civilizations have exhausted the viability rate, and therefore the grids that are upholding the enclosure configuration, because that is not a holographic interactive simulation program. Just you pay attention here, because the holographic interactive simulation program is in the fourth dimension. And that's part of the original restoration program that were later adapted into the artificial fourth and artificial fifth and became the regenesis program. Now, I'm not drumming up a lot of drama here. That's not my point. My point is prepare. Get ready. The world is changing. And for those of you who have just seen it in snippets and then forget it and go on as usual, and then you're just reminded because you read the news, that's all good and fine. We all do what we can do, the best way we can do it, within the framework where we are, within the culture where we are, and the differences that goes with the different factional oversight of the different parts of our planet. I will address one thing, because I've got a couple of emails from a listener who is a little bit dissatisfied, but I also pay attention to the sadness and the despair and the cry for help, which is in some of the words, which then lashes out and are then saying, why you're not talking about India, why you're not talking about the different deities there, why you're not addressing this. There is so much cultural richness within the Hindu culture, and absolutely correct. And yes, it used to be a high culture, and now it's on a decline. We have Greece that used to be a high culture that is now on decline. We had so many places in the Southern Hemisphere that used to be high cultures, but they are living on grids where high cultures rose and fell and depleted the grid. And that's part of the circumstances we're seeing in the Southern Hemisphere. And within the next 50 years, we'll do the same up here in the North. So in that way, it's just the world is depleting its resources, not just the physical one we can see as part of the quantum field technology, atom configuration that is going on everywhere on the planet, where there are different spots on the planet where the fourth dimension is beginning to peek through And my best guess is, for instance, Skinwalker Ranch is one of them. And if you envision living in a world where everything becomes like the Skinwalker Ranch, you begin to have an idea of how the future is going to look for the majority of people on this planet. It's not going to be the same as it was in the Middle Ages, where we had the underworld that surfaced and other places. So we are going to have some pretty interesting years ahead of us. Let us just put it this way. And all depending on where we are on the planet, we will have different ways of dealing with things. And that is part of some of the future challenges that we have ahead of us. Looking at where we are on the planet, the culture that we are part of, the strengths and the weaknesses, and what's really going on in behind the scene, as I have learned the hard way with my own continent, and some of the factional issues that have been going on here that has, on a personal level, of course, also made my life a very complex and very unpleasant one, the entire life that I have had. And this is just the human condition. There are, if we go back to some of the ancient texts, if we go back to some of the ancient understandings of the different, for instance, cultures and their ways of looking at the world. And again, we are within the Holocene. And the Holocene is technically where we really got this sun that is now depleting. So it's not that overlay that we'll put on the sun. We're a part of what took us into the Holocene, that created the conditions for the Holocene. And that configuration is tied to the quantum field technology, which, of course, I'm calling it technology, just to give it the understanding that it's engineered that way. And it is engineered in the outer domain configuration, where most of the energies in the outer domain are tied to the void. So you have a quantum field, kind of not a network, it's not even a network, it's a quantum field of possibilities and probabilities that are highly limited into a very specific configuration we call the third dimension. I'm investigating that now so we can make a distinctive understanding that the third dimension is not based upon a holographic interactive simulation program. But when the fourth dimension begin to bleed through, there will be aspects of this that we can begin to engage with, and that will create what we call disturbances in the way that our technology is working. It will create disturbances in the way that what we are doing. You should look to Skinwalker Ranch in a way and listen to some of the anomalies that they're experiencing there, because if we get the bleed through of the fourth dimension, and I do think when we talk about Skinwalker Ranch, that there is a craft there in the Mesa. So, because I've seen many crafts buried in Australia and other places, and if they activate due to the fourth dimensional energies that are coming in, then we can see that the local environment that is within the sphere of the craft, because on Skinwalker Ranch they talk about there's this bubble. And I saw some of the same effects in Australia as well, which is, I'm just right now on the curiosity level. I'm not saying anything, I'm not claiming anything, because they haven't got through into the Mesa and into the little hill there and figure out what it is. But the signatures of this bubble that is around the craft, that is fourth dimensional and is creating this very non-local activity, weird configuration, and things that can pop in and out. All of this is very consistent with a fourth dimensional pocket in our reality field. And here we're talking about the original pocket from the original LPU. And that could also explain, there of course the stories with the Skinwalker Ranch, that the ones that lived there for 30 years or something, the original family, I think it was the Shermans, I can't remember these details, that's for a podcast on its own, where I have things correctly, so you can just look into that for yourself right now. They didn't experience anything, but of course we could say, they could just say that because they are part of that generation where you didn't talk about these things. But it could also be true. Simply because when the group moved in 1996, that bought it, that they lived there for a year before Bigelow bought the ranch, and they saw UFOs and all sorts of things. 1996 would fit with where the Pleiadians, whatever was left of that group, pulled out. That could have made a change, because perhaps already there, patches of the original fourth were beginning to peek through, or potentially patches of the artificial fourth as a part of a cleanup process, where things are reconfigured to its original settings. So we have got a lot of possibilities going on. Okay, so that's for a podcast on its own, which I have to because when I begin to think about some of the things I saw in Australia, and I also got that very strong indication, the fourth dimension is coming back into your reality field. So we can stay with that. What we need to ask is it the artificial fourth, which is collapsing? So no, it's not that, and I'm beginning to get indication. No, it's going to be the original LPU. And then it makes sense why the whole academy, the teachings there of you connecting to your template and you learning to work with your template that is part of the fourth dimension, that is running on the holographic interactive simulation program, where reality mirrors back to you what you are and what you need to work with, where everything becomes a mirror, which then also means you can create your own little local influential sphere that is in alignment with your vibratory state. That's part of the fourth dimension. The quantum field technology took that away and locked it in to a specific frequency pattern. And that is also something I'm investigating more, because that gives some very odd variations within the frequency spectrum that science has barely begun to understand what that is, the different states. They have only got the double slit. I think they have made a 3-slit experiment also. But what happens if they make a 4-slit? What happens when they get out of this very, very strong idea that the fourth dimension is time and begin to really work at, okay, could there potentially be fourth dimensions where we're dealing with things that are beyond our known sciences and onward and so forth? That will come later, potentially, or not at all. And then it will, I don't know how that's going to go. And to be frank, I'm not the prophet. So I don't know. That's human behavior. And that is always unpredictable. So we are having differences in the world makeup due to the viability rate of the grids of where we live. And some of the original reseeding civilizations happened a long time ago, technically before the Holocene. But within the Holocene, certain bleed-throughs of the original configurations of the reseeded civilizations that happened after the fall of Atlantis, which was in the fifth dimension. Atlantis was in the fifth dimension. I have no knowledge of an Atlantis as part of this planet. I simply don't. So I don't know what that should be, but I know of the one in the fifth dimension. And I also know at that point in time when it was there, the fourth and fifth dimension was part of the outer domain, but our planet didn't exist. So it's not part of our understanding of civilization. And the round planet we have now is a much later configuration that came to be over, and this is where it gets so difficult and convoluted, but that's part of that quantum field technology that we don't know of yet, is that the configuration can change. And as it changes the entire electromagnetic field. And that changes the structure of the planet. So technically, our planet could have arisen 10,000 years ago. We don't know these things, but if we go with science, they will say, no, we look at the sediments, we look at the age of the rocks and whatnot, and we will say it predates so-and-so and whatnot. But technically, how do you really date rocks if they are beyond that time period where you can't use carbon-14 dating? How do you date anything? It's not solid in rock, so to speak, that we got this, we know this. So point being is that once you change the configuration of the quantum field, and that's part of some of the experiments that they are trying to do, as we know, with the Higgs field and whatnot, what are they doing, and trying to figure out what was the early stages of the universe, where they're actually just looking at the early stages of the quantum field technology. If that changes, then the whole configuration changes. And that means the electromagnetic field as we know of it could have been changed and then create that kind of planetary structure we now know today, these kind of vessels that we are now aware of today. It doesn't mean that it always was that way. And when you change an entire reality field into a complete new configuration, all levels of it will adjust to that configuration. There technically is no time. There are momentarily snippets of the original configuration, which then flips right back into the artificial configuration. I'm saying it's not just the artificial fourth and the artificial fifth that is part of the enclosure. our artificial third is also part of the enclosure. It's not the original outer domain configuration. It is administered by the core technology of our planet. Okay, and that's super important to understand that. Once the fourth dimension begins to ripple through, and this is not going to be in our lifetime when it does the full flip, let's put it that way, but we will have sections that will begin to have bleed-throughs, like the Skinwalker runs, will be my best guess. And I'm not trying to drum up drama here, but just pay attention, because that's some of the information I got when I went to Australia. That understanding that this will happen, and that's part of the enhancement projects that are going on. That's part of the trying to get off-world programs that's going on, because they know this planet has so-and-so back time left, and we're talking perhaps 200 years, so we won't experience it. But we are in the transition period where what upheld the world will begin to decline, will begin to get less strong, will begin to have bleed-throughs, will begin to go through this transition, which we are seeing through, for instance, when you have, I'm just thinking about another talk from Skinwalker Ranch. There's this biologist, I forgot his name. And again, when I'm doing one on that one, because I most likely will have to, I'll be up to tough snuff with these things, but I don't remember people's names, and for a very good reason. But there was this biologist, and he has made his own thing, and anyways, this is not what I want to talk about. But the key point is he has done some very interesting observations, which are very similar with when the fourth dimension will kick in and how it affects the biology. And of course, I'll have to investigate that. But that in itself is a whole podcast. And my brain is not ready for that information yet, so I can't. It's just the beginning that opens up. I need more fourth dimensional energy to be able to speak with certainty, let's put it this way. Right now, I'm speaking from a level of investigation and curiosity, but I haven't got to the point where I can see the pattern and then begin to speak with certainty. But I know there are important information from the Skinwalker Ranch, and others have felt the same way, but I might derive things a little bit differently. But this biologist, and most of what he discovered were not brought as part of the History Channel, which he, of course, is a little bit discontent with. And I completely understand, because he actually sits with the key of how that affects biology. They talk about some of the things that are happening, but in here he talks about the very specific things on animals that he has seen. And one is the lack of decomposing of the animals that die there. Take it outside the bubble and they begin to decompose, which in itself is also very, very interesting, because we know ancient cultures always talk about the deities that lived for eternity and humans that were living much longer than others. And science, of course, always said that's just myth. It's not that I want to go into a complete, we're going to live eternally. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, again, we have accounts of certain things that if we get the fourth dimension back, or pockets of the fourth dimension, will begin to explain a lot of stuff within myth, and a lot of things that we have seen explained in myth, where gods were coming out of mountains, literally, where the extraterrestrials, and things that were happening that doesn't happen anymore, because the fourth dimension was really shut down, what we could say when we began year zero. A new overlay were put in there, and things got much more restricted and took away most of that. It already began 2,500 years ago, and the last, I think it's 5,500 years ago, where that technology began to shut everything down, and the quantum field technology became the main type of restriction technology to keep things within the frequency pattern we are observing today. So there are these fluctuation in human history. But of course, of all of this technology, it has depleted the original outer domain reality grid. And the structure of the original outer domain is becoming more and more like void energies. And that's also what we see bleed-throughs in the sun and bleed-throughs on specific patches on our planet. It's just a matter of time. We could potentially speculate, are the sinkholes void energies? Is that where that bleeps through, and then suddenly there's a sinkhole? Because the entire quantum field technology can not uphold the possibility and probability of land, but is now losing that configuration. These are some of the things, the challenges that we are to see around the planet. And this is where those of us who have an interest and a knowledge in investigating on a different level, we need to begin to rise up. And we need to begin to go into this, okay, I'm experiencing this, what does that mean? And begin the what we call a kind of a private investigation, a researcher that is not just taking face value, but actually begin to really investigate with consciousness from template level, using our original capacities of that the world is not what we think it is, that reality is not what we think it is, and that we have a huge responsibility in how we respond to the different challenges that we are seeing around the world. And that's where I want to put the attention here, that yes, we go through different phases, and yes, we go through different emotional states where at sometimes we have this very curious investigative mode, and other times we just feel this is hopeless, and we're fluctuating between these two states of, okay, keep going, and then what's the point, right? And that's human, that's where we are. And it is a big challenge. It is those of us who are truly getting in contact with our original consciousness potentials and are beginning to operate within what we call the fourth dimensional holographic interactive simulation program. Our world is changing. Our world is beginning to mirror back to us what we need to do. It is beginning to ask of us how you're using your capacities for the upcoming challenges. I'm not talking about that we should go out and save the world, because we can't. And let me just put that right there. The idea that one person can change an entire planet is just, yeah. We'll just leave it at that. It's a very, very nice story that's possible. It is a comforting story that goes with, as I often say, the inner child that needs mom or dad to come and fix things. But that's not how this world works. That's not how it was built to work. This is built to undo the effects of the timeline event. This is built for us to learn to handle our consciousness potentials in a setting of different types of energies that we are to learn to transform. So whatever is causing frustration, whatever is causing dissatisfactionness, dukkha, is ours to investigate. It is ours to look into, why do I feel this pain? Why do I feel this dissatisfaction? Why do I need to lash out? What is it that's going on in me? What is the root cause of this? What is that I am now being shown with this dissatisfactionness? What is it that my behavior is telling me that I need to learn to transform and get to that point where we go into, as we have learned from the Buddhist teachings, go into equanimity, where we go into that balance, that coherence pattern that connects us further with our template. When we are yearning to go home, we're yearning to reconnect to our template, our original consciousness potentials. It's not a place. Our human brain confuses it with a place. I want to go home. No, you want to reconnect to your original consciousness structure. And there has been a lot of teachings that have pointed in that direction. And many of these teachings have also been turned into something else, and they have been distorted, and they have been put into worshipping deities or external forces, when the matter of the fact is this yearning for safety and feeling at home and being in harmony and balance goes with us reconnecting to our original template structure that is positioned in the fourth dimension. Right now, under the different control and factions of the artificial fourth dimension. And it's our job to learn how to regain the administratory powers of our own consciousness / template structure. And the template is not pure consciousness. It is composed of holographic energetic units that responds to the original holographic interactive simulation program of the restoration program. And it's up to us to kick it back into that position so that when the world begins to have these different pockets of fourth dimensional energies, it could be there's, as far as I can see with the Skinwalker Ranch, there is those who come in with a more calm demeanor are the response is better than those who come in with this, I got this, or are highly skeptical. There is a tendency for the feedback loop of the energies of the Skinwalker Ranch to really shine in their faces. You need to change your ways in whatever form that is. And that's why I find that it would be interesting. Unfortunately, there's not as much around the Skinwalker Ranch that I would like. And I don't think that me going to the skinwalkerranch.com or whatever the website is and pay the monthly fee and look through the cameras will do much for me. So I'm just investigating. And then, of course, I will put it into the framework that makes sense to me and what I need to understand. And in that way, come up with some ideas of what does it mean that the fourth dimension begins to come back into our reality. And that's some of the interesting challenges that we have ahead of us, that where we are moving from being focused in the past and connected to the different scavenger groups that are now running rampant in the entire Southern Hemisphere and take as much as they can before they no longer can be here, because the scavengers are tied to the artificial fourth, and the artificial fourth is depleting. So that means they are under limitations as well, and they are, wherever they can, they're taking as much as they can, which of course has another unfortunate side effect, which depletes the grids of the Southern Hemisphere even more. That is also something that we need to pay attention to. So the key point here is not the artificial fourth and everything, all the critters that are there, because they will no longer be there, but the challenges that we have of the original fourth dimensional LPU sun that is peeking through the sun on certain days, because I have noticed now it has come through. It's not just the void, it's not just the phantom sun, it's not just the distortion level of the artificial fourth of the breaking down. So these are the 4 different phases of the sun. The one was the original fourth dimension LPU, one where it's connected to the void, one where it's connected to the phantom field of the third dimension, and the quantum field technology that's also breaking down due to the things, the experimentations they have run as part of the great colliders. They have damaged more than they think. That's why they're seeing not why, that's wrong for me to say so with that certainty. As I see it, in my opinion, doing what they did with these colliders have fragmented the outer domain configuration further. And in my opinion, that's one of the reasons why they are seeing more smaller particles. They are creating these smaller particles, running what they are doing and are affecting the quantum field technology. Okay, so that's part of some of these things that we're going to deal with. So in a way, we could say the foundation of our world is changing. That's the kind way of saying it. It's transitioning. And then, of course, as part of the sun, the last section of it is when it goes into the artificial fourth, which is the one most of us grew up with, the artificial fourth dimensional overlay technology that keeps us in the quantum field possibility fields that are engineered and administered in a very specific way. And that technology is also deteriorating. Hence, the bleed through of some of the void dynamics, the bleed through of some of the phantom field dynamics, which are the levels of the outer domain of further ancient civilizations where there is absolutely nothing left of the previous universal cycles. There's not even nothingness. There is absolutely whatever's there so fragmented. And anyways, I'll just leave it at that. And then the artificial fourth, I'm repeating myself. So point being, we are to learn to figure out when these different stages of the sun is, because that impacts not only the grids, but it also impacts our template, because we're in the middle of the grids that are tied to our template and our biology, as well as the solar levels that are coming in that are affecting the 3 lower fields, because that's part of the original environment of which we are part. Everything is being affected. So we do have some challenges ahead of us, which I don't have the answers to, and I probably won't get the answers to. I can tell you these are what I'm seeing. These are the conceptual frameworks. As always, when we talk about advanced civilizations, we are fully aware of our environment, of what's going on, of the different groups of civilizations, of everything that's going on, and we learn to navigate that. We could say that humanity is expanding into understanding a completely different framework of reality, We're expanding into understanding a completely different world arrangement of different types of civilizations. And we're expanding into move beyond our neural network concepts of consciousness, as in the Latin word of knowing with, conscience, knowing with, and then going in and say, well, we are now expanding that understanding that consciousness is not just what's in our brain, but actually expands into much, much vaster arrays of information fields that we can connect with, and then get this information of the original LPU that will begin to mirror back and show our shortcomings and show our capacities and show us what we need to work with to restore and get back on track with completing the cycles of this reality field. And yes, you will say, well, then with the original LPU in the fourth dimension, then there will be a future for humanity and will continue as part of the original LPU as just if we transform ourselves. And that is definitely a possibility. I'm not ruling that out whatsoever. However, the LPU is also under restrictions. The LPU is also undergoing its complete re-engineering process because it was never meant to go on forever. And it has technically it should have been shut down a very, very long time ago. However, due to this is where the enclosure and the re-engineering comes in, and why it's not just about the colonization, and why they shut away the original fourth dimension of the LPU, or then later on of the artificial fourth. It is just as much to do with the fact that the construct itself of the LPU, as we had the timeline event from the fifth dimension and below, things got fragmented, inverted, and were changed into a different configuration. That meant that whoever was part of the higher dimensions of the original LPU continued their journey in whatever forms it was. And these are some of the different collectives, which we oddly enough can then say, well, why did they choose to then colonize and do whatever they did in the outer domain? And for that, I don't have the full answers of that yet. But I am aware and I can see that whatever they did of below and above the fifth dimension and whatever they tried to do, they have completed their cycles. Many of them are moving on, as I got from some of the Niburians in Australia. We're moving on. We might return later, all depending on the state of as they begin to reset. But they are moving on. So the question is, where are they moving on to? They're not moving back into the original worlds because they decided not to take the original configuration. Have they then created other worlds, other types of constructs where they are living? Are they now just jumping from construct to construct within pocket realities of the LPU? These are some of the questions we need to ask. I don't have the answers, but there are puzzles that we don't have the answers for. The only thing I can say is that whatever's left of the LPU will only run for a short while, and then that will collapse and fall away. Will that then mean that we will go back to the original worlds? That's a good question. That I can't say with certainty either. All I can rely on is that when I look at the trajectory of our little universal structure here, that little pocket we call our universe, when I look into the future of that, then all of the stars are, as we're seeing already, they are running off fumes of what they used to be and turn into dwarfs and then neutron stars or whatever and explode and cease to exist. And yes, they will accrete in some odd, weird dust cloud or whatever that is. But the matter of the fact is it will turn into more and more black holes because it is the outer domain and it will configure itself back into the original connectivity to the previous universal cycles of the 10th previous universal cycles, of which everything was depleted and done. We could say in a good state it will go to Pralaya. We could say in a lesser good state that will be part of some of the cyclical deposit realms that will cease to exist altogether, aka phantom fields. That we don't know either. That's so far into the future. That's some 2135 into the future where everything looks like that. And I don't have the answers for that either. I can only see it, and then I can begin to contemplate on potentially what that could be and ask the right questions and see what I can get a feedback of information from that will give me an indication of what does that then mean? What is going on there? And how does that assist us in the understanding of what we're doing now? So what I'm asking and what I'm trying to share here for people who are listening to my material is the not the lack of emotionality, because we are who we are and we do have emotions. We do use the practices and the teachings that assist us in reaching a higher degree of coherence and harmony, a higher degree of clarity. We're cleansing the emotional mental fields to reach that higher degree of clarity where our responses, they can still be emotional, but we are then understanding why they're emotional, and we're working with that emotionality for further clarification and for further transformation that will lead to a larger degree of coherence, that will there lead to a larger connectivity to original fourth dimensional template structure, that will lead to a higher degree of transformation of our biofield, that will lead to a higher degree of transformation of our emotional mental fields, that will lead to a higher degree of interactiveness with the reality we are part of, from where we can get more information, from where we can continue our growth, from where we'll begin to unfold our capacities, from where we will be better equipped to navigate in a world that is changing and becoming like leopard spotted skin that has patches of this and patches of that will work in different ways. And we will learn to understand which patches to avoid, because that's phantom, which patches to avoid, because that's not where we want to go. That's on the what's left of the artificial fourth and what's been going on there. And we will learn to move our organism to patches. I talked about this before, to grids that are less harmful. There are no perfect spots left, but less harmful. And we will learn to travel accordingly. We will learn to move around as we can within the zone where we can move around. Because once we've done through the 2027 migration, we will begin to see that travel is not going to be so easy as it used to be. And I'm not saying it's going to be impossible. I'm just saying right now we have had very open everything. You can just go wherever you want. That will change, and we're already seeing signs of that, including when we are beginning to have some of the great migration waves that will come within the next 15 years. 50 years. 15 to 50 years. That will change a lot of policies around the globe. So again, for those of you who have an urge to travel and do it within the traditional ways of doing that, I strongly suggest you do that within the next 5 years. And then you begin to prepare, okay, where can I settle? And is there any place we can settle? And when we settle, in what way do we settle? So we have a lot of very interesting explorations to find solutions as we move along. And as always, I will say, as one of the key features of the fourth dimension and the original advanced civilizations is that they are not staying put at the same place. They are moving according to the environment. They are changing when the environment was changing. They are adapting when the environment changes its configuration. And that's a key thing that humanity must really learn, both emotionally, mentally, but also physically. That's some of the challenges we're going to see in the future for those who will do the orientation towards what does it really mean to become a level 1 civilization, which you know is where I want to push us all the time. But I still haven't got the pattern is not ready yet. So it's there. I can see it. It's a possibility. But nobody's tapping into it yet. So it's not beginning to go from possibility into probability. It's not even close. And that's why I just get, we need to go there. And then every time I just get, that's not where anyone is there yet. So it's just a beautiful dream as things are right now. But the more that begin to transform and get connected to the original template structure and begin to work with their capacities in whatever way and form they can, whether it's just having a little slot somewhere, a little spot in the rule somewhere, and or growing their own vegetables and begin to work with that holographically as part of the fourth dimension, whatever it is that we decide to do, those of us who are beginning to work correctly with the original fourth, and using our advanced capacities to do so. We're going to be the one that will be drawn to the patches on the planet where the original fourth will be for a while, and we will learn to navigate that environment. So that is already on the table as things are changing, and they're changing quickly because the sun is now exponentially growing more and more into stronger and stronger affectability when it goes through its different stages over the course of the month. And with that, I will end this little August update. And until next month, those of you who unfortunately can't get into the membership due to different types of restrictions, I am so sorry about that. I can't do anything about that. And if as I said, if a lot of people were donating a lot, I could make it all for free, but people are not donating because we don't all have the resources. And then it is those who do have the resources, they will then find ways to support, and they are doing. And those who don't, they will find other ways to find the information that they need. And I'm so sorry, but I still have to eat. I still have to pay the rent. I still have to exist. And 95% of my material is for free. And seriously, I can't do all for free. Then I have nothing. What am I to live for? How am I going to feed myself? So patience is also, and kind of also considering my life would be nice. Understanding where I am and what I've gone through and how difficult it is for me. And what I have experienced that has formed me into who and what I am. And we could say, to be very personal, the reason why I'm doing this, if I didn't do this, I wouldn't have any purpose of functioning and continuing being in this world. So I'm doing this work to keep me going. Okay? So just so you understand, that's the core reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because if I wasn't doing this and feeling that it had a purpose, that people could learn from it and grow from it and potentially get where they needed to go so we could all complete and then do the full round of the LPU as it was supposed to become. If I didn't tap into that, there would be no purpose and meaning for my existence in this world. I was done a long time ago. So just so you understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. So that's my driver. That's my driving force for doing this. And for those of you who are sensitive, you can feel my sadness. And I know I'm not tapping into that much. But we're at the end of the month. And it's a very strong, hot day today. And I am in contact with some of this sadness. And I think it's also okay that you sense that so you don't forget that I am also human. I have emotions. I have experiences that has formed me into what I am. And none of them have been particularly easy. But I'm still standing. And I'm still transforming. And I'm still sharing. And I do that because that's the way I cope with all the things I go through and everything that I know. I'm not doing it because I'm on a high horse, that things I know, because I don't. But I investigate, and that gives me answers. And I'm just saying, we're all in the same boat. We all stem from the same core level of the LPU. We all began this journey together as a team. And now we have ended out in the outskirts where we're so segregated that we've forgotten that we used to be a team. So that's part of the level 1 civilization, that we realize that we are a team. This is our construct. We all made it together. We decided this was the game we wanted to play. However, fragmentation kicked in and we have now forgotten that. But that is part of the journey. And if we want to complete, we need to start to learn to work as a team again. So that's where we're going. So with that said, until next month, take care.